Hey guys, so it's time for another monthly meta-analysis where I go through the publicly available replays of the top ranked players on Dueling Book and outline what decks they were playing and their win percentages. This time around I did things a little differently where I wanted to ensure that I included replays only starting from June 4th, where Lightning Overdrive became legal, which meant I needed to look up more players to get enough replays, so I actually ended up looking up to top 50 players instead of the usual top 25. So let's get started. So here is the deck breakdown for this month. So for those of you new to my monthly meta analysis, keep in mind that this graph is based on the number of matches included, 557 this time, and not based on the number of players. So for example, we see that Dragon Link contributed the most matches at 20.8% or 116 matches out of the 557 included. Now I know we're all sick of Dragon Link and perhaps it finally gets hit on the next ban list, but it is still certainly a strong deck despite some other new decks in the mix. I actually recently made a video analyzing Dragon Link's turn 1 board and their win percentages based on a variety of different cards played, so don't forget to check that out if you haven't yet. The next most played deck was Drytron, which probably isn't surprising since the buff it got from Lightning Overdrive, and I'll talk more about the top 5 decks later in the video. Then the next most played deck was at Ignister, which totally caught me off guard, although granted, I haven't had the chance to play much since Lightning Overdrive came out. I actually did a poll on this a couple of days ago asking my subs which surprise deck they thought made it to the top 5, and most of them guessed at Ignister, so they nailed it. They got several support cards in Lightning Overdrive, so it was cool to see the top players trying this deck out. Then we have Pure Zodiac at 4th, followed by Tri-Brigade Zoo at 5th, and some old familiar favorites such as Dinos, Prank Kids, and Shaddoll, which saw a lot less play in this month's meta-analysis. You have other usual appearances such as Virtual World, ABC, and Mech Knights, and decks bundled in the other category included Buster Blader, Burning Abyss, Eldritch Zodiac, and a few more. I also have been keeping track of the proportion of these matches by our top players involving a Dogmatica or Eldritch engine, and this number has dropped a lot this time around, with only 5% using a Dogmatica package and 1.3% using an Eldritch package. Now compare this to last month's meta-analysis where Dragon Link, Prank Kids, and Dogmatica Invoke Shaddoll were the 3 most played decks, and now the latter 2 have certainly fallen off in online play this month. A lot more decks were playing the Dogmatica and the Eldritch engines as well last month compared to now. So overall, our top players won about 71% of the matches. This number is usually around 75% in my previous meta-analysis based on the top 25 players, so I suppose this makes sense that it dropped a bit since I am now looking at top 50 players. As for the playstyles of decks used by our top players, 61% were combo decks, and this is usually the case every month where they tend to prefer combo over control. As usual, let's cover the top 5 most played decks in a little bit more detail. As for Dragon Link, this deck might be on its last days as the top deck, at least for now, with the potential upcoming ban list hits. An insane deck right now, of course, winning 79% of the matches among our top players that use this deck. When it got to go first for game 1, they ended up winning about 88% of their overall matches and won 69% when they had to go second for game 1. Still a strong win percentage even if they didn't get to go first for game 1 as planned. In terms of the deck's performance in the last 7 days among all players on Dueling Book, whether good or bad players, this was the 4th most played deck and still had an impressive win rate of 60%. Let's see how this win percentage changes after the next list. Next we have Drytrons, which is now back to tier 1 status after the release of Diviner of Heralds and Mu Beta Fafnir. This deck provides a really unique advantage of having the orange heralds in hand that they can search, giving them monster effect negations from the hand that you have to deal with, even if you were to get passive Herald of Ultimateness on the field that they set up. Now interestingly enough, this deck only won about 64% of the matches this time around, which is lower than I thought it would be. Now of course, we are always dealing with small sample sizes with these analyses, and it's also possible that the players are still getting hang of the deck's new line of plays, and we probably need to give it a bit more time. This was the case the last time when Drytrons first emerged into the meta. Their win percentages weren't fascinating, but they were very successful in the next LCS that happened shortly after. Now if it got to go first for game 1, it won 67% of their matches while winning about 61% of the matches when they had to go second for game 1, so not too much of a disparity for this month. In terms of its performance in the last 7 days on Dueling Book among all players, this deck was technically the most played deck. Now oddly enough, on YGOscope.com, the Drytron decks get split up in like 4 separate decks, something along the lines of Drytron Herald or Cyber Angel Drytron, when they are all the same deck, so if you were to add them up together, they would be the most played deck and had a win percentage of 57% among all players. So like I said earlier in the video, we have our surprise deck in the top 5, which is at Ignister. I obviously don't know too much about this deck, but I know it got some key cards in Lightning Overdrive like their Searcher spell and the Link 1 that can search their field spell. They seem to end on their Link 6, the Arrival Cybersat Igniser, which typically ends up being a 4000 attack body that's unaffected by card effects. Overall, it won 64% of the matches, so I think that's still pretty impressive given its likely rogue status at the moment. Funnily enough, when it got to go first for game 1 as they intended to, they won 61% of the matches, while doing slightly better when they ended up having to go second for game 1. In terms of the performance in the last 7 days among all players online, it certainly is popular among everyone as well, and not just the top players. It was the 5th most played deck as of recently and won about 55% of the matches among all players, so again, pretty similar to the win rate of Drytron surprisingly. Next we have Pure Zodiac, which is still seeing a lot of popularity despite the exploding interest in Tri-Brigade Zoo. It still won a respectable 71% of the matches in this month's meta-analysis. Now here we see a clear example of our small sample sizes leading to wonky numbers. So when Pure Zoo got to go first for game 1, they only won about 48% of their overall match. Now typically Pure Zoo actually want to go second, but the thing is, from the replays that I saw, it actually seemed like the Pure Zoo list included in this video were mostly all aiming to go first instead, and yet they actually did much better in terms of the overall match result when they had to go second for game 1. In terms of the performance among all players, this deck is certainly very popular, coming at 3rd and winning about 57% of the matches. And finally, we have Tri-Brigade Zodiac, which also got a bit of support from Lightning Overdrive with the release of the new Tri-Brigade Link monster, Bearbrum, that can now search and add the Revolt, which is a very strong card allowing them to special summon a Tri-Brigade Link monster on your opponent's turn, typically Shurig, to banish a card on the field. Overall, it won a really hot 81% of their matches, and when it got to go first for game 1, it won 85% of the matches, compared to still an impressive 77% when they had to go second for game 1. Among all players, this deck was the second most popular deck behind Drytron, and it probably doesn't surprise you if you play on Dueling Book often. Even among all players, this deck still won 64% of the matches, which is really impressive and one of the highest among all the decks. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's meta-analysis. Hope you found that informative and useful. If you did enjoy the video, then I'd appreciate it if you could share this to your fellow Yu-Gi-Oh friends so I can continue to grow as a channel. Take care guys.